Hello, my name is Emily Aiken, and my complex problem that I'm going to be demonstrating about is human trafficking. So, let's first look at the life of a victim. This video is about Rebecca Bender's story of being a human trafficking victim. Due to all of the triggering things that are talked about, I chose not to show this video, but I will briefly explain what it is about. It talks about her story of being a day-to-day victim and what it was actually like to be sex trafficked. This is just such a heartbreaking video and shows how big of an issue this is and how this needs to be stopped at all costs. So, what is human trafficking? Have you ever thought about a time whenever you feel as if you have almost no control over your life? Well, this is nothing compared to what actually it is like to be someone who is trafficked. So basically, human trafficking is the act of gathering, moving, receiving, or keeping human beings by threat, force, coercion, or deception for exploitative purposes. Also, the exact definition due to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crimes is also the exploitation of prostitution of others or other forms of sex exploitation, forced labor or services, slavery or practices similar to slavery, servitude, or the removal of organs. So this definition by the United Nations is going to be about what is most commonly thought about human trafficking, which is sex trafficking, but we will also be covering other types of human trafficking. So one must think, what is this? How does this happen? How do these people get taken and forced to do things that they don't want to? Because obviously this is illegal.
Over 20.9 million men, women, and children are victims of human trafficking. But do you know what human trafficking actually is? In a small, sleepy town, people are dreaming. But not everyone's dreams will come true. Human traffickers prey on people's dreams and lure them away for their own benefit. How do they do this? Human trafficking doesn't happen all of a sudden. It's a process. First, traffickers act. This includes recruiting victims, transporting them to the place where they'll be exploited, hiding them from authorities, and receiving victims from other traffickers. So why don't the victims run away or say no? Because traffickers use different means. This includes threatening or forcing victims to do what they want, abducting or deceiving the victims, and abusing power. Sometimes traffickers promise small payments or benefits to get the victim to cooperate. And why are the traffickers doing this? The purpose of trafficking is exploitation. Traffickers take advantage of victims for their own profit or benefit. This is human trafficking.
So this video was great at explaining about how people get slipped into it. It's not necessarily always someone being kidnapped and taken away. Sometimes it is finding someone that is in a bad position and they think that they're going to work, but are slowly, over time, it turns into being human trafficking because of illegal activity or bad treatment. So now we're going to talk about the history of human trafficking. So the original form of human trafficking actually originated from the African slave trade, where people were kidnapped from Africa and brought over to do forced labor. The next form of this is also called white slavery. So basically, it was where not only was it Africans that were brought over to Europe or to the Americas to work on plantations and such, but now it was also women and young girls that were specifically white. This was specifically for usually prostitution. So then the first time this was really acknowledged on a global scale was in 1904, the International Agreement for the Suppression of White Slave Traffic, the first international agreement on human trafficking, outlawing it and saying that this was not okay for everything that was going on. Throughout the years, actually, though, human trafficking has become such a broad term. Usually, it is thought about as just sex trafficking and stealing young girls into prostitution, where they're typically raped or sold off for their body or for their acts for their pimp. But it's actually developed a lot over time. So there's been new definitions of it in 1921, 1949, and then all the way to 2000 of this ever developing definition because of all the different ways people are being coerced and forced to do things that they don't want to. So now let's talk about, since we've talked about the past of human trafficking, what it is like now in the modern day. So now there is four different types of human trafficking that we see and are most commonly talked about. So sex trafficking is where a person is coerced, forced, or deceived into prostitution or maintained in prostitution through coercion. This is usually where people are being sold out by their pimps, and it is not only women, it can include men as well. Bonded labor is where force or coercion is the use of a bond or debt to keep a person under another person's rule. So essentially saying that this person owes another person a very, very large sum of money, they could force them to work for them or possibly be like a drug mule and such to pay back their debts, even though it's illegal. Basically, it's using a debt over top of someone to bond them to the place that they're at. Domestic servitude is a forced labor that is of involuntary domestic workers. So typically is where it's a very informal work practice or workplace and it is connected to like an off duties living quarters. So typically it's almost like a slave in house or so and forcing someone to like live at their workplace and then owning them there at that place day round. And then forced labor is another form of servitude where an employer may take advantage of their workers that are vulnerable because this type of work that they're doing is not the workforce is not being protected by the law. And so this could be like drastically underpaying someone so that they have to keep coming to you for some type of work, even though you're not really paying them at all, but they just desperately need the money. So now that we learned about all these horrible things and all the different kinds, there are currently 510 known human trafficking flows all over the globe, which is insane. But do not fear, this can be ended. So, how do we end this? This is how to abolish uh, the human trafficking. So, there's essentially 6 steps of awareness, creating policy that protects these people to eradicate slavery. This is really important to protect these people because a lot of them, like for example, prostitution is usually illegal, so people who are being sex trafficked are afraid of also coming forward because they don't want to be arrested for what they were forced to do. Rescuing, so like taking young children out of this. Prosecution, so legally enforcing criminals to go to jail that are doing this. Taking care of the individuals after, and then empowering survivors of this so that they're no longer vulnerable to these shady types of work to get by. And then some great charities or resources is this is the US Human Trafficking Hotline. So basically, if you see anyone that you think may be trafficked or a pimp, you can call this number and it will get the police involved to try and rescue them or to investigate what's going on. The Agape International Missions, Polaris, the Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking, also known as CAST, and then Love 146 is another great organization, and that these all try and protect victims and to try and abolish this terrible act of human trafficking. And then these are my articles that I used in my presentation to gather information. I really hope you enjoyed my presentation and learned something. Thank you.